Supreme Commander Vex Ithara could not believe what her sensors were showing. For 847 stellar rotations, the Thracian Confederation had dominated this sector of the galaxy uncontested. They were the oldest race, the most technologically advanced, the self-proclaimed guardians of cosmic order. And now, before her, was a message from a species that had barely discovered warp propulsion 3 centuries ago: humans. The message was simple, almost insultingly direct. She played it again on the holographic screen, her tentacles trembling slightly with something between amusement and irritation. The words hung in the air, translated into the Thracian language. "This is the last time we ask politely. Withdraw your fleets from neutral territory. Stop interfering with the trade routes of smaller species. Stop imposing your laws on independent civilizations. This is your final warning. If you continue, we will show you what we truly are." Vex Ithara let out a sound her subordinates recognized as a disdainful laugh. Her second-in-command, strategist Corvel, approached cautiously. "Supreme Commander." The message was transmitted simultaneously to all 47 central worlds of the Confederation. They made sure we all received it. "Of course they did," Vex Ithara replied, her compound eyes glowing with millennial arrogance. "These evolved primates want to be noticed. They want us to take them seriously. It's pathetic, really." Corvel hesitated before continuing. "Commander, our analysts have reviewed the historical data on humans. There are some troubling inconsistencies in their development profile." "Inconsistencies?" Vex Ithara repeated, turning fully to face him. "They are a Class 4 species, barely out of their planetary cradle. What inconsistencies could possibly concern us?" The strategist activated his own interface, projecting graphs and data into the air between them. "The technological development curve does not follow any known pattern. Most species take between 800 and 200 years to go from discovering electricity to achieving warp propulsion. Humans did it in 180 years. Then they stopped." "Stopped?" Vex Ithara repeated, her voice dripping with skepticism. "They didn't stop, Commander. They drastically slowed down. In the last 300 years, they've shown only incremental advances, nothing revolutionary, as if deliberately holding back their progress." "Or perhaps they've simply reached their limit," Vex Ithara suggested. "Not all species have the same potential. The Thracians took 40,000 years to reach where we are. We can't expect these young creatures to catch us." Corvel didn't look convinced, but knew when not to push. "And their ultimatum, Commander, how should we respond?" Vex Ithara turned back to the main screen, watching the positions of the Thracian fleet spread across the sector. "We will not respond. We will continue our operations exactly as planned. If the humans attempt to interfere, they will be reminded of their place in the natural order of things. Send orders to all fleets. Proceed with the consolidation protocol. It's time to bring the lesser species of this sector into the proper sphere of protection. On our terms." Corvel bowed in submission. "As you command, Supreme Commander." But as the strategist withdrew, he couldn't help a final glance at the data on humans. There was something there, something his survival instincts, honed by millions of years of evolution, were trying to warn him about. Humans were not like other young species. There was no youthful arrogance in their message, no empty bravado. Only a calm, cold statement of fact. This is your final warning. In the solar system, 47 light-years away, the Secretary-General of the United Earth, Sarah Chen, shut off the transmission and turned to the room full of representatives from Earth's nations and the Martian and lunar colonies. The silence was heavy, laden with expectation and fear. "They didn't respond," she said simply. Russia's defense minister, Dmitry Volkov, slammed his fist on the table. Arrogant as ever. "They think they can ignore us indefinitely." The European Chancellor Margaret Stein raised her hand. "Perhaps that's for the best. If they had responded with immediate hostility, we wouldn't have time to prepare properly. Sarah Chen nodded slowly, her gaze sweeping across the faces around the table. Each of them knew what was at stake. Each of them had been told the truth, the full truth, only 3 months ago. Japan's Prime Minister, Yuki Tanaka, spoke with a firm voice despite the tension visible on her face. How long until full activation? Admiral James Harrison, commander of the United Earth Space Defense Forces, consulted his datapad. 72 hours until all systems are online. Sigma facilities are in the final phase of synchronization. Delta facilities completed testing yesterday. Alpha and Beta have been ready for a week. Chen took a deep breath. Then we have 72 hours to hope the Thracians come to their senses. African Representative Kwame Okonkwo leaned forward. And if they don't, if they continue their subjugation operations, then we activate Project Awakening, Chen replied, her voice unwavering despite the crushing weight of those words, and we show the galaxy what humans really are. Volkov smiled, but there was no humor in his expression. 300 years, he said. 300 years maintaining the facade, making us look harmless, slow, unremarkable, all the while in the shadows, while the world slept in its illusion of mediocre peace. It wasn't a facade, Margareta Stein corrected firmly. It was a necessity. When we reached the stars and found the Thracian Confederation and the other ancient powers, we saw what happened to species that showed too much potential too quickly. We saw the Kreetok reduced to vassals. We saw the Yorlam forced to surrender all their technological secrets under threat of annihilation. We learned the lesson before it was too late. Sarah Chen stood, walking to the massive window overlooking Earth below. The blue-green planet rotated serenely, indifferent to the monumental decisions being made in its orbit. My grandparents were in the room when the decision was made, she said quietly. When humanity chose to hide its true nature, its true capability, I was told it was the hardest decision they ever made. She turned back to the group. We built cities in Jupiter's clouds that the Confederation never detected. We mined the asteroid belt with technology centuries ahead of what we show publicly. We developed quantum propulsion, gravitational manipulation, phase fields, dimensional cloaking systems. And we kept it all absolutely secret, showing the rest of the galaxy only an infinitesimal fraction of what we're capable of. Why? Asked Yuki Tanaka, though she already knew the answer. Because ancient civilizations like the Thracians do not tolerate rivals, Chen replied. They tolerate servants, they tolerate vassals, they tolerate species they can control. But equals? Never. They would have crushed us in the cradle if they'd known what we could become. Admiral Harrison stood, joining her at the window. And now we have no choice. The Thracians have crossed the line too far. The smaller species we've secretly promised to protect are being enslaved. Trade routes near our space are being militarized. It's only a matter of time before they turn their full attention to us. Chen nodded. Exactly. For 300 years, we maintained the balance through deception. But that balance is broken. Now we must show that we are not lambs waiting to be devoured. We are wolves pretending to be sheep, and it's time for the revelation. Kwame Okonkwo raised his hand. One question, Secretary General. When we activate Project Awakening, when we show our true capabilities, won't we be starting a war that could devastate the galaxy? Possibly, Chen admitted. But if we do nothing, we allow a far greater evil. The Thracians have acted as benevolent tyrants for too long. Someone needs to remind them they are not the only players on the board. And frankly, after studying all available galactic history, I think humanity is uniquely qualified for this role. The 72 hours passed like compressed eternity. Each hour brought news of Thracian fleets advancing on independent worlds. The Velkari, a peaceful amphibian species that had developed a remarkable society based on arts and philosophy, saw their 3 colonized moons surrounded by Thracian destroyers. The X-then, silicon-based creatures who thrived in high-radiation environments and had shared their unique shielding technology with several smaller species, received an ultimatum: integrate into the Confederation or face total economic blockade. In the command hall of Project Awakening, buried 12 kilometers beneath the lunar surface, Dr. Elizabeth Park watched hundreds of screens as systems came online one by one. She had devoted 40 years of her life to this moment, since she had been recruited at 25, right after completing her triple doctorate in quantum physics, unified field engineering, and xenotechnology. All systems green, she reported to Sarah Chen, who stood beside her. The Earth's polar energy projection facilities are synchronized. The antimatter generators on Ganymede are at maximum capacity. The phase satellite network is in position. The dimensional portals are calibrated. We're ready. Chen looked at the countdown clock. 2 hours and 17 minutes until the secret deadline they had set. 2 hours until they would show the Thracian Confederation that they had gravely underestimated humanity. "Dr. Park," she said calmly, "are you absolutely certain the calculations are correct, that we won't accidentally destroy half the solar system in the process?" Park smiled faintly. "Secretary General, we've tested every component of this system 1,000 times. Not at full scale, obviously, because that would reveal everything, but the simulations are unequivocal. When we activate Awakening, the Thracians will see something no species in the galaxy has seen in 100,000 years. They will see what it truly means to be human." At the Thracian Confederation's command post, Supreme Commander Vexithara received progress reports from her fleets. Everything was proceeding as planned. Another 12 systems would be under Thracian protection by the end of the rotation. The humans had done nothing but transmit more protest messages, each more desperate than the last. Or so it seemed. "Commander?" Corvell interrupted her thoughts. "I'm detecting energy anomalies in the solar system." Vexithara didn't even bother to look up. "Anomalies? Specify." "Massive energy spikes at multiple points in the system, patterns that don't match any known technology, now at the outer edges, on various moons, at the poles of the primary planet. The levels are incompatible with the capabilities humans have previously demonstrated." Finally, Vexithara looked up, her tentacles undulating in a pattern indicating reluctant interest. "Show me." The holographic screen expanded, showing the solar system. And there, pulsing red, were dozens of energy points, each generating signatures that would make an antimatter plant look like a candle. "This is..." Vexithara began, but the words died. For 847 rotations, she had commanded fleets. She had seen technologies from hundreds of species, but this was different. "Commander," Corvell said, his voice now heavy with real alarm, "I'm receiving a transmission from the humans. Open channel, all frequencies. They're broadcasting to the entire known galaxy." "Put it on the main screen," Vexithara ordered, her former arrogance evaporating quickly. The image shifted to show a middle-aged human woman, black hair pulled into a severe bun, dark eyes burning with unshakable determination. She wore a uniform Vexithara didn't recognize, black with silver accents, no visible insignia except for a strange symbol on the shoulder, a phoenix rising from flames, clutching planet Earth in its talons. "My name is Sarah Chen," the human began, her voice calm yet carrying a weight that made Vexithara instinctively straighten. "I am the Secretary General of United Earth and the Guardian of Project Awakening. This message is directed to Supreme Commander Vexithara of the Thracian Confederation and simultaneously to all civilizations in the galaxy. For 300 years, humanity has lived a carefully constructed lie. We presented ourselves as a young, inexperienced, technologically limited species. We accepted the role of newcomers in the galactic community, followed the rules set by the ancients, kept ourselves humble and discreet. All of it was theater, a necessary performance. Because we learned very quickly after our first contact with the Confederation that the universe is not kind to species that show too much potential. We saw what happened to the Kretok, to the Yorlam, to the Sethrani, brilliant, innovative species that made the mistake of revealing their true capabilities too soon. And they were crushed, absorbed, controlled. We decided that would not be our fate. Chen paused, letting her words sink in. So we built a mask. We showed a diminished version of ourselves. We shared obsolete technologies as if they were our greatest breakthroughs. We built ships that were deliberately inferior. We created a facade so convincing that even we began to believe it. But beneath that mask, in the shadows, in the silence of deep space and the hidden depths of our worlds, we worked, we researched, we developed, and we created wonders that would make the Confederation's technology look primitive. Vexthara felt a chill run through her body, a sensation she hadn't experienced in decades. "This can't be true," she murmured. Corvel didn't reply, his own eyes locked on the screen. "We gave you, Thracians, multiple opportunities to reconsider your path," Chen continued. "We asked for diplomacy. We asked for respect. We asked you to stop subjugating smaller species. You ignored us. Then we gave you an ultimatum, and you laughed. Now, it's time for you to understand why that was a mistake that will cost you your position of galactic supremacy." With those words, Chen's image was replaced by visions of the solar system. But it was not the quiet, underdeveloped system the Confederation thought it knew. It was a fortress, a war machine, on an incomprehensible scale. Earth's poles glowed with blue-white energy, fields visible even from space, bending light itself around them. In Jupiter's orbit, continent-sized structures floated in the upper atmosphere, previously hidden by dimensional distortions, now revealed in all their impossible glory. Ganymede was not just a colonized moon. It was an antimatter generator the size of a world, capable of powering entire fleets. The asteroid belt, which had seemed empty to Thracian scans, in fact housed thousands of military and industrial facilities, camouflaged by technology that warped space around them. And then, the most stunning sight of all, around the entire solar system, in a perfect sphere extending beyond Pluto's orbit, points of light began to appear. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Phase satellites, each capable of generating force fields that could stop even antimatter weaponry, but they weren't only for defense. We are now activating what we call the awakening field. Chen's voice resonated over the images. It is a system-spanning network of energy generation and force projection. It can do many things. It can defend us from any known attack. It can create instant warp portals to any point within a 500 light-year radius. It can manipulate local gravity on a systemic scale, and if necessary, it can be used as a weapon that would make a supernova look like a matchstick. The energy readings on Thracian screens were going insane. Corvel tried to process the numbers, but they made no sense. "This isn't possible," he whispered. "The energy levels are orders of magnitude beyond anything any civilization has ever achieved. Even the core ancients don't have this kind of capacity." Vexthara finally found her voice. "Tactical analysis. Now, what do we have that can penetrate those defenses?" Corvel worked frantically at his console for long moments. Then, slowly, he turned to face her. "Nothing, Commander. If these numbers are correct, and our sensors insist they are, the humans could withstand the combined attack of the entire Confederation and still have energy reserves left. Worse, if they direct only 10% of that capacity offensively, they could destroy any fleet we send." "But now comes the truly interesting part," Chen continued in the transmission. You see, we humans have a philosophy you may not understand. We believe in giving chances. We believe in mercy, even for those who don't deserve it. So, I will make you an offer, Supreme Commander Vexithara, a single, non-negotiable offer. Withdraw your fleets from all territories you are currently threatening. Free the smaller species you have coerced. Open the trade routes. And enter into good faith negotiations with a truly representative Galactic Council, not one dominated by the Confederation. Do this, and this demonstration of power ends here. We will not take revenge. We will not humiliate you further. We will simply adjust the balance of power and move forward as mature civilizations. Chen leaned forward, and for the first time her expression showed something beyond calm determination. It showed steel. But if you refuse, if you try to challenge us, if you do not take this ultimatum seriously, then I promise you, by Earth and by all the generations who sacrificed their lives to build what we are revealing today, we will show the galaxy what happens when humanity is underestimated. And it will be a lesson no civilization will forget for the next 100,000 years. The transmission ended abruptly. The silence in the Thracian command post was absolute. Then, slowly, Corvel turned to Vexithara. Orders, Commander? Vexithara looked at the energy readings, the combat capacity projections, the analysis from her computers that clearly said, retreat or die. All her life, all her species' history, had been built on the premise that they were the most advanced, the most powerful, the designated guardians of the galaxy. And now, a species they had considered little more than glorified primates had revealed it had surpassed the Thracians while pretending to be inferior. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but the alternative was extinction. Send the message, she said, her voice heavy with bitter defeat. All fleets are to retreat immediately, initiate de-escalation procedures, and prepare a response transmission. It seems, she paused, searching for the right words, it seems we have gravely underestimated the humans. In the days that followed, the galaxy went into turmoil. Sarah Chen's transmission had been seen by billions of beings on hundreds of worlds. Reactions ranged from total shock to secret satisfaction. The smaller species that had been oppressed by the Confederation celebrated openly. At last, someone had challenged the tyrants. Mid-level civilizations frantically re-evaluated their own capacities, wondering what other species might be hiding similar secrets. And the ancient powers, including not only the Thracians, but the Krovar, the Zenthi, and the enigmatic core Silence, entered emergency sessions, trying to understand how they had been so completely deceived. In the solar system, Sarah Chen watched events unfold from the Project Awakening Command Hall. Reports flowed constantly, each bringing more confirmation that the plan had worked better than they had dared to hope. The Thracian fleets were retreating. Smaller species were being freed from ultimatums, and most importantly, negotiation proposals were arriving from every direction. Dr. Park approached, carrying a data pad. Full status report, Secretary General. The awakening field functioned perfectly. We consumed 23% of our energy reserves in the initial demonstration, but we've already replenished 18%. The hidden facilities remain operational and undetected. And this is interesting. We're receiving communication signals from 47 different species requesting private audiences. Chen smiled slightly. Let me guess. They want to know if we have more surprises hidden, and if they can ally with us before someone else does. Precisely, Park confirmed. I think we've created a new galactic paradigm, Secretary. The old paradigm was based on fear and control. The new one will be based on, well, fear too, but a more distributed fear. Balance through mutual uncertainty. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Not ideal, but better than unilateral tyranny. The comm band on her wrist buzzed. It was Vexithara requesting a private call. Chen looked at Park, who shrugged. I think the Supreme Commander wants to negotiate personally. Chen accepted the call. Vexithara's image appeared in miniature in the air before her. The Thracian leader looked as if she had aged decades in the past few days. Secretary General Chen, Vexithara began, her voice carefully controlled. I've come to formally present the Confederation's acceptance of your terms. Our fleets are withdrawing, the smaller species are being released from their obligations, and I've proposed to the High Council that we begin discussions on a new structure of galactic governance. Chen inclined her head respectfully. I appreciate your pragmatism, Supreme Commander. I know this decision wasn't easy. Vexithara made a sound that might have been a bitter laugh or a sigh. It wasn't. But my primary responsibility is the survival of my species, and the calculations are clear. Fighting you would ensure our destruction. Cooperating, we might learn something. She paused. May I ask a question off the record? Chen nodded. Of course. Why? Vexithara asked. Why hide your capabilities for so long? Why not simply reveal your strength from the beginning and claim your place as a galactic power? Why the entire charade? Chen considered the question carefully. Because, Commander, we humans have a long, dark history of using power in ways we regret. World wars, holocausts, near-nuclear extinction multiple times. When we finally reached the stars, we made a promise to ourselves. We would never again be the aggressors. We would never again use force simply because we could. She paused. But we also promised we would never allow ourselves to be victims again. So we built Project Awakening as insurance. A guarantee that if someone forced us, if someone left us no choice, we would have the capacity to defend ourselves and to defend others who couldn't defend themselves. Vexithara processed this. So your show of force is not a prelude to conquest? You truly intend only to rebalance galactic power and then go back to being, what, good neighbors? Chen smiled. Basically, yes. But good neighbors with tall fences and excellent security systems. Vexithara's expression was hard to read through the physiological differences, but Chen thought she detected something like grudging respect growing there. You humans, the commander said slowly, are stranger than any xenopsychological analysis predicted. We usually take that as a compliment, Chen replied. When negotiations officially begin 1 Earth week from now, I hope we can find common ground, despite everything that's happened. Vexithara inclined her head in a Thracian gesture of agreement. As I said, we are a pragmatic species. Adaptability is our strength. It seems we will need it now more than ever. The call ended, leaving Chen alone with her thoughts. Dr. Park returned, this time with a worried expression. Problem? Chen asked. Not exactly, Park said slowly. But we just received a transmission from the core silence. They want to meet with us, in person, on neutral ground, and they said they have information about other species that, like us, have been hiding their true capabilities. Chen felt a chill run down her spine. The core silence were possibly the oldest known civilization, having existed for at least 800,000 years. They were enigmatic, rarely communicating, and when they did, it was only about matters of extreme importance. It seems our revelation triggered more than we expected, Chen said. Accept the invitation, and Dr. Park, prepare the Shadow Fleet for activation. Just because we've shown some of our cards doesn't mean we've shown them all. We still have surprises in reserve. 3 weeks later, Sarah Chen's ship emerged from hyperspace into a star system that appeared on no official map. The coordinates had been sent by the Silence with specific instructions. Come alone or with minimal escort and prepare for uncomfortable truths. Chen had brought only her personal ship, the Resolute, crewed by a skeletal team of 12, all veterans of Project Awakening. And the Shadow Fleet, of course, trailing 5 light-years behind, ready to jump in seconds if necessary. The system before her was extraordinary. 3 stars in a perfect triangular configuration, defying all known laws of orbital mechanics. Between them stretched impossible structures, bridges of solid light connecting worlds that should not exist. And at the center of it all, a space station that made the largest human constructions look like children's toys. It was the size of a small moon, but its surface flowed and shifted constantly, as if partially out of phase with normal reality. "Secretary General," Captain Rodriguez, commander of the Resolute, called from the bridge. "I'm receiving a targeting signal from the station. They're guiding us to a docking bay in the western sector." "Proceed," Chen ordered, trying to keep her voice steady despite the awe she felt, "and keep all defensive systems on silent standby." The approach took 2 hours, each minute revealing more impossible details of the station. Energy fields that contained atmosphere without physical barriers. Structures extending into dimensions the human eye could not fully process. And more unsettling, occasional glimpses of other docked ships with designs that matched no known civilization. When they finally docked and Chen descended the disembarkation ramp, she was greeted by a figure wrapped in something that was part garment, part energy field. The silence had never revealed their true form to other species, always appearing through holographic avatars, or, as now, completely concealed. But when the figure spoke, its voice resonated directly in Chen's mind, bypassing her ears. "Welcome, Sarah Chen of Earth. Thank you for answering our invitation." Chen inclined her head respectfully. "The honor is mine, though I admit I'm curious and a little apprehensive about why the Core Silence wished to meet after our recent demonstration." The figure gestured toward a corridor stretching behind it, walls pulsing softly with light that seemed alive. "Walk with me. What I have to show and tell cannot be adequately transmitted through electronic signals. It requires presence, context, understanding that transcends raw data." Chen signaled for Rodriguez to hold position and followed the silent down the corridor. As they walked, the walls around them began to display images, not projected but rising from the station's very substance, like memories becoming visible. "You humans," the silent began, "believe you have executed a brilliant stratagem, hiding your capabilities, pretending to be less advanced, then revealing your true strength when necessary. It is a strategy we admire for its elegance." Chen felt a knot forming in her stomach. But you are not the first." The images on the walls shifted, showing civilizations Chen had never seen. Species of every conceivable shape, and some inconceivable. Worlds of breathtaking beauty and technology that made Project Awakening look primitive. "In the last 800,000 years, the silent continued, we have witnessed 2,147 species reach the stage of advanced spacefaring. Of these, 1,123 developed the same strategy as yours, conceal their true capabilities, present a diminished face to the cosmos, build secret forces." Chen stopped walking. And what happened to them? The silent stopped as well, turning to face her. The images on the walls now showed scenes of conflict, not individual battles, but wars spanning entire galaxies. Weapons tearing the very fabric of space-time, entire civilizations erased from existence in instants. Of the 1,923 species that followed this path, the silent said calmly, 1,921 eventually destroyed themselves or destroyed others. The cycle is always the same: revelation of hidden power, forced rebalance of galactic dynamics, escalation by other species seeking parity, exponential arms race, and finally, total war when the tension becomes unsustainable. Chen felt her blood run cold. "And the 2 exceptions?" "We, the Silence," the figure replied, "and the Guardians of Andromeda, who chose a different path." Both of us learned the same lesson. Hidden power eventually demands to be used, and once used, it can never be put away again. Chen forced herself to process this information. You're saying we doomed humanity by revealing Project Awakening, that we've started a cycle that will lead to destruction. The silent gestured, and the images on the walls changed again. This time they showed Earth, not as it was now, but as it could be. One version devastated, continents cracked, oceans boiling. Another where Earth simply did not exist, just an asteroid field where a planet should be. And a third version where Earth glowed with impossible, transcendent light, but empty, its population having ascended or vanished in some transformation beyond comprehension. Not necessarily, the silence said. But the path ahead is more dangerous than your current understanding allows. You have destabilized a balance that has existed for millennia. The Thracians will retreat, yes, but only to reconsider and rearm. Other species are at this moment accelerating their own secret research programs, desperate not to fall behind. And there are others, civilizations unknown even to the Thracians, who watch and calculate, deciding whether humanity represents an opportunity or a threat that must be eliminated preventively. Chen took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain composed. Then why tell us this? If our path almost certainly leads to destruction, why not simply let us walk blindly to our fate? Because, the silence said, and for the first time, Chen detected something like emotion in its telepathic voice. In 800,000 years, only 3 species have truly surprised us. Ourselves, the Guardians of Andromeda, and now you. The figure began walking again, and Chen followed. The 2 previous species that surprised the silence did so through technological innovation. You surprised us in a different way, through restraint. Restraint? Chen frowned. You had the power to reveal yourselves 200 years ago, the silent explained. Our retrospective analyses show you could have dominated this sector of the galaxy 2 centuries ago had you chosen to. But you did not. You kept your power sheathed not for decades, but for centuries. Patience on such a scale is extraordinarily rare. Most species, once they develop superior capabilities, cannot resist using them. They had reached a vast chamber, its ceiling stretching upward beyond where the light could reach. In the center, a structure floated, something between a machine and a living organism, pulsing with energy that made the awakening field look like a dim lamp. This, the silent said, is the weave. It is our answer to the problem you now face, and it is the reason we survived when 1,121 other species did not. Chen approached cautiously, feeling the structure's energy vibrate in her bones. What does it do? It maintains balance, the silent replied. Not through force or threat, but through fundamental understanding. The weave is connected to the very fabric of reality in this region of space. It detects when civilizations are about to enter spirals of self-destruction and intervenes. Not directly, but through subtle adjustments to physical constants, quantum probabilities, even the flow of local time. Chen turned sharply to face him. You're manipulating reality, secretly controlling the entire galaxy? Not controlling, the silent corrected, balancing. It's the difference between a gardener and a dictator. We don't tell plants how to grow, but we ensure the soil remains fertile, that water flows, that the nutrient balance is maintained. In the same way, we don't control civilizations, but we ensure the conditions for their survival remain viable. Chen processed this, thousands of implications racing through her mind. And what do you want humanity to do exactly? Join you in that role, become secret guardians? We want, the silence said, to offer you a choice. A real choice, not a false one between 2 bad options. The figure gestured, and 3 images appeared in the air between them. The first showed Earth isolated, surrounded by its defenses but clearly alone, other civilizations keeping a cautious distance. The second showed Earth at the center of a web of alliances, but the web glowed red with tension, lines of potential conflict branching like cracks in glass. The third showed Earth connected to something larger, a weave of light stretching beyond the boundaries of the visible galaxy. Path 1, the Silent explained, pointing to the first image. Defensive isolation. You maintain your revealed capabilities as deterrents, but pull back to your own system, minimizing interactions. It's safe in the short term, but it leads to stagnation and eventual irrelevance. Path 2. Competitive engagement. You become an active galactic power, forming alliances, competing for influence. This is the path most choose. It's also the one that leads to arms races, escalation, and eventual self-destruction. And the third path? Chen asked, though part of her already guessed. Transcendence through cooperation, the Silent replied. You join us and the Guardians of Andromeda in a different role. Not as conquerors or competitors, but as stewards, helping maintain the balance that allows all civilizations to thrive, even those that will never know we exist. Chen was silent for a long moment, looking at the three images. Finally, she spoke. And if we refuse all three paths, if we find a fourth path? The quality of the silence changed, and Chen had the impression the Silent was smiling, though it had no visible face. That response, Sarah Chen, is precisely why you were the third species to surprise us. Most civilizations, when presented with these options, choose one immediately. You question the premises themselves. You ask whether these are truly the only choices. So there is a fourth path, Chen pressed. There is always one, the Silent replied, but I cannot describe it to you because it does not exist until it is created. What I can say is this. The 1,921 species that failed all believed power was the most important resource. The two that survived, us and the Guardians, learned that understanding is more valuable than force. If humanity can learn that lesson without first destroying itself, you may truly create something new, something that we, with our 800,000 years of experience, did not foresee. Chen nodded slowly. I need to consult my government. This is not a decision I can make alone. Of course, the Silent agreed. But while you consult, consider this. You revealed Project Awakening to protect smaller species from Thracian oppression. A noble motivation. But protection can easily turn into control. Defense can turn into domination. The line between guardian and tyrant is thinner than most admit. I will return to Earth immediately, Chen said, and I will take your message to the Global Council. But I have one last question. The Silent waited. Why me? Why reveal all this to me specifically? Why not make a public announcement or contact our government through official channels? Because, the Silent replied, you were the one who made the decision to activate Project Awakening. You bear the weight of that choice. And in the coming weeks, months, years, as the consequences of that decision unfold, you will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. We want you, when those tests come, to remember this conversation. Remember that power is not the answer to every problem. Sometimes the greatest strength is knowing when not to act. The journey back to Earth was long and silent. Chen spent most of the time in her private quarters, reviewing holographic recordings of the conversation, analyzing every word, every implication. When they finally reached the solar system, they found a dramatically changed situation. The revelation of Project Awakening had triggered a galactic arms race, exactly as the Silence had predicted. Intelligence reports showed that at least 34 civilizations had significantly accelerated their military research programs. 3 species had revealed their own hidden capabilities, though nothing close to human scale. And, more worrisome, the Thracians had begun experimenting with technologies their own scientists described as dangerously unstable. At the Global Council's emergency meeting, Chen presented everything the Silence had shared. The room was dead silent when she finished. Finally, Minister Volkov spoke. "So we're doomed? No matter what we do, we're leading the galaxy to destruction." "Not necessarily," Chen replied, "but we must be smarter than the 1,121 species that came before us. We must find a path none of them found." "And how do you suggest we do that?" Chancellor Stein asked. Chen took a deep breath. "By proposing something radical, something that runs counter to every instinct that led us to create Project Awakening in the first place." She activated a holographic projection at the center of the table. It showed Earth encircled by the awakening field, but now with lines connecting it to dozens of other systems. "I propose we open Project Awakening. Not completely, we won't reveal everything, but we begin sharing, selectively, with species that demonstrate wisdom and restraint. We help raise others to our technological level instead of maintaining supremacy through secrecy." The reaction was exactly what Chen expected. Bursts of protest, accusations of suicidal naivete, vehement arguments that this would give away their only advantages. But she waited, letting the storm subside, and then continued. "The current model leads to arms races and war. The Silence proved it with 800,000 years of data. But if we change the paradigm, if we turn power from something to be hoarded into something to be shared responsibly, perhaps we can break the cycle." Admiral Harrison leaned forward. "What if we share with the wrong species? What if we give these technologies to someone who uses them for conquest instead of protection?" "Then we test before we share," Chen replied. "We do not give to everyone. We create strict criteria. We share only with civilizations that have demonstrated over centuries a commitment to values aligned with ours. And we maintain safeguards, ways to disable shared technologies if they're misused." Yuki Tanaka, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "It's a huge risk, but consider the alternative. If we do nothing, we follow one of the three paths the Silence described, each ending badly. This plan, selective, careful sharing, might be the fourth path, the unforeseen one." The debate continued for hours. Eventually, Chen called a vote. The plan passed by a narrow margin, 34 in favor, 29 against, 12 abstentions. It wasn't a strong mandate, but it was enough. In the weeks that followed, Earth initiated discrete contacts with selected species. The Velkari, the amphibian philosophers who had impressed human observers with their dedication to peaceful conflict resolution. The X-Then, the silicon beings who had freely shared their shielding technology without demanding anything in return. The Mirani, a bird-like species that had sacrificed its own territory to provide refuge for victims of wars that didn't involve them. To each, Chen personally presented a simple proposal: true partnership. Access to advanced technologies in exchange for a commitment to responsible use and mutual aid. The reactions varied, but one common theme emerged: disbelief that a more powerful species would offer such a thing without demanding subordination. It was with the Velkari that Chen had the most revealing conversation. Their representative, a matriarch named Shells Singing in Rain, met Chen in a specially constructed water garden in Geneva. "Secretary General," the Velkari said, her voice translated through patterns of water and light, "your offer is generosity beyond comprehension, but also confusing. Why give power to others? Why not simply rule, benevolently perhaps, but rule?" Chen watched the water flow through the garden's intricate sculptures, each current perfectly balanced against the others. "Because ruling requires constant force," she replied. "It requires the imposition of will. And eventually, no matter how benevolent at first, every ruler becomes a tyrant. We've seen it in our own history thousands of times. A partnership, Shell's singing continued. Partnership requires trust, and trust is rare between different species. It is, Chen agreed, but it's the only sustainable basis for lasting peace. Force breeds resentment, control breeds rebellion, but trust, true trust built through consistent actions over time, creates something that can endure. The Velkari was silent for a long moment, thoughtful patterns rippling through the water around her. "Very well," she said at last. "The Velkari accept your proposal, but with one condition." Chen raised an eyebrow. "Which?" "That you humans also allow yourselves to be vulnerable, that you share not only your strengths but your weaknesses. True partnership cannot exist between the strong and the weak, only between equals who choose to support one another." Chen considered this. It was a complete inversion of the thinking that had created Project Awakening. But perhaps it was exactly the inversion needed. "I agree," she said. "We will share vulnerabilities along with capabilities. It will be frightening. It may even be fatal if we miscalculate. But it's the only path I see that doesn't lead to guaranteed destruction." In the months that followed, something remarkable began to emerge. Not a traditional alliance with hierarchies and formal agreements, but a network of genuine collaboration. Earth shared phase field technology with the Velkari, who in turn shared their advanced biomedicine techniques that could heal previously fatal wounds. The X then received access to antimatter generators and provided in return their unique radiation shields that operated on principles human physicists were still trying to understand. But the real test came when the Thracians made a desperate move. 3 months after the initial revelation of Project Awakening, their experiments with unstable technology produced something even their own scientists hadn't expected. A weapon that could destabilize phase fields, making humanity's primary defenses potentially useless. And Vexithara, under mounting pressure from militarist factions in her government, authorized its deployment in a show of force near Velkari territory. The message was clear. Humanity might have impressive technology, but it wasn't invulnerable. Chen received the news in an emergency meeting. Projections showed that, with this new weapon, the Thracians could potentially penetrate the solar system's defenses if they concentrated sufficient force. The awakening field still provided massive protection, but no longer absolute. "We need to respond," Volkov insisted. "Demonstrate that any attack would result in their complete destruction. A retaliation they will never forget." Chen was silent for a long moment. Then she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "No." Volkov stared at her as if she had gone mad. "No? They just demonstrated a weapon capable of piercing our defenses, and you want to do nothing?" "I want to do something different," Chen corrected. "I want to do something none of the 1021 failed species tried. I want to offer cooperation." The room exploded in protest, but Chen raised her hand. "Hear me out. The Thracians developed this weapon because they're desperate. They see their place in the universe crumbling. They see other species forming partnerships that exclude them. They're acting out of fear. And when we respond to fear with threats, we only amplify the fear and guarantee escalation." "So what do you propose?" Harrison asked. Chen activated her communicator. "Open a direct channel with Supreme Commander Vexithara. Just the two of us." Nabin. When the connection was established, Vexithara's face appeared on the screen, her tentacles rippling in patterns that indicated extreme tension. "Secretary General, I've come to lodge a formal protest." "Supreme Commander," Chen interrupted gently. "I saw your demonstration. Impressive technology. Your scientists are clearly more capable than we estimated." Vexithara looked momentarily wrong-footed by the lack of threats. "So, you acknowledge you are not invulnerable?" Chen nodded. "We've always acknowledged that. Why do you think we kept Project Awakening secret? It wasn't arrogance. It was the recognition that no matter how powerful we became, there would always be risks. There would always be vulnerabilities. The trick is deciding what to do with that knowledge. The Thracian commander didn't reply immediately. Finally, she spoke, her voice carrying the weight of exhaustion. "What do you want, Chen? Why aren't you threatening retaliation?" "Because retaliation is the old path," Chen replied. "The path that leads 1921 of 1,923 species to destruction. I'm trying something new. I'm offering, genuinely with no strings attached, collaboration. You developed a weapon that pierces phase fields. We developed phase fields. Imagine what we could create together if we combined these technologies. Not as adversaries seeking advantage, but as partners seeking understanding." Vexthara made a sound that could have been laughter or shock. "You're proposing scientific cooperation. After everything, after we tried to subjugate dozens of worlds you protect, after we developed a weapon specifically to punch through your defenses." "Yes," Chen said simply, "because the alternative is an arms race that ends in a war that kills billions. And because I believe, truly believe, that you Thracians are not evil. You're an ancient species trying to maintain order in a chaotic universe in the only way you know how. But there are other ways, better ways, and I would like to explore them together." Silence stretched. Chen could see Vexthara processing, weighing, calculating. Finally, the Thracian commander spoke. "My council will consider me mad. Militarist factions will call for my removal, but—" She paused. "But I am tired. Tired of threats. Tired of posturing. Tired of pretending that force alone is enough. So yes, Secretary General, let's explore cooperation. But know this, I will be watching. And if this is a trick, a trap, a way to weaken us, you will know the full fury of the Thracian Confederation." "It isn't a trick," Chen assured her. It's just the hope that we can be wiser than the generations of species that came before us." In the weeks and months that followed, something extraordinary happened. The partnership between Earth and the Thracian Confederation, initially viewed with extreme skepticism by both sides, began to produce real results. Thracian and human scientists working together discovered that the anti-phase weapon and the phase field technology, when properly combined, could create shields that were simultaneously stronger and consumed 60% less energy. This discovery was immediately shared with the Velkari and X-Then, who added their own improvements. Within 6 months, a defensive technology that surpassed anything previously known was available to all species participating in the cooperation network. And the network grew. Species that were initially skeptical, seeing the tangible results of collaboration, began to approach. Not all, certainly. There were civilizations that viewed any sharing of power as weakness to be exploited. But enough joined that the galactic balance began to shift, not toward a dominant empire, but toward a cooperative ecosystem. Chen met again with the representative of the Core Silence 1 year after their first meeting. This time, the meeting was in the solar system itself, the Silent having traveled to them, a sign of respect that did not go unnoticed. "You have surprised us again," the Silent said, its telepathic voice carrying something that almost sounded like pleasure. "In 800,000 years, we have never seen a species take the path you chose. Power sharing, intentional vulnerability, true cooperation. Against all odds, it appears to be working." "It's still early," Chen replied cautiously. "There are factions in every participating species that oppose the approach. It will take generations to solidify this new paradigm, and I acknowledge it may still fail, but for the first time, I feel we have a real chance." The Silent gestured, and a new image appeared between them, showing the galaxy not as it was, but as it could be. webs of connection linking thousands of worlds into a network of mutual interdependence. "We have been watching," the Silent said, "and we have decided it is time to reveal something we have kept secret for 800,000 years. The Guardians of Andromeda, and we are not the only ancient civilizations that survived. There are others, 7 in total, spread across other galaxies. We have remained hidden from one another, each believing itself unique in its survival. But your approach, this experiment in true cooperation, has convinced us that it is time for us to emerge from the shadows. All of us." Chen felt the weight of those words. 7 ancient civilizations, each with potentially 800,000 years or more of development, emerging simultaneously. The implications were staggering. "Why now?" she asked. "Why reveal yourselves after so long in hiding?" "Because," the Silent replied, "for the first time in our existence, we have seen a young species choose cooperation over domination when it had the power to dominate. We saw humans offer vulnerability when you could have offered threats, and that gave us hope that perhaps, finally, the galaxy is ready for something beyond the cycle of rise and fall we have watched repeat countless times. We are tired of hiding. Tired of passively observing as civilizations destroy themselves. We want to participate, contribute, but only if the paradigm changes, and you, surprisingly, have initiated that change." Chen processed this, feeling the burden of responsibility. Humanity had revealed Project Awakening out of necessity, to protect smaller species and ensure its own survival. But inadvertently, it had triggered something much larger. A fundamental reconfiguration of how intelligent civilizations interacted. "When?" Chen asked. "When will you make the announcement?" "In 3 standard months," the Silent replied. "Enough time for you to prepare your population, because the announcement will not be ours alone. All 8 ancient civilizations will emerge simultaneously, offering knowledge, technology, and guidance to any species willing to embrace cooperation over competition. It will be the most transformative moment in galactic history, and you, humanity, will be at its center." The 3 months passed in frantic preparation. Earth, along with its partners in the cooperation network, worked to prepare their populations for what was coming. There was skepticism, of course. Conspiracy theories flourished. Militarist factions in several species argued it was a trap, that the ancient civilizations were planning conquest under the guise of cooperation. But Chen and her counterparts on other worlds persisted, presenting evidence, demonstrating good faith through consistent actions, slowly building trust. When the day finally came, billions of beings across hundreds of worlds watched as 8 civilizations, each ancient beyond comprehension, revealed themselves simultaneously, not through displays of military force, but through offers of knowledge. The core Silence revealed dimensional manipulation technologies that could allow instant travel between galaxies. The Guardians of Andromeda shared stellar cultivation techniques that could rejuvenate dying stars, extending the lifespan of solar systems by billions of years. The Weavers of the Void, a civilization that existed partially outside normal space, offered understanding of additional dimensions that could revolutionize everything from computing to medicine. And so on, each ancient civilization bringing gifts that would fundamentally transform what was possible. But they all emphasized the same point, over and over. These technologies would only be shared with civilizations that demonstrated commitment to cooperation. There would be no imposition, no control, only an offer left open to those wise enough to accept it on the terms presented. The response was mixed, as expected. Some civilizations embraced the offer immediately, eager to access knowledge that would otherwise take millions of years to develop. Others recoiled, suspecting deception, preferring to rely on their own power, and some, worryingly, accelerated their military programs even further, seeing the emergence of the ancient civilizations as an existential threat that had to be met with force. It was one of these civilizations, the Crovar, that forced the first real test of the new paradigm. 6 months after the revelation of the ancients, the Crovar, a warrior species that had built an empire through relentless conquest, launched a massive attack against the Velkari. Their logic was cold and calculating. The Velkari had gained access to advanced technologies through the cooperation network. If the Crovar could conquer them and seize those technologies, they would gain massive advantage without having to submit to the terms of cooperation. The attack came without warning. Crovar fleets emerged from hyperspace around the 3 main Velkari worlds, their weapons charged, their generals confident of swift victory. The Velkari, despite now possessing advanced defensive technology, were pacifists by nature. They had never fought an aggressive war in their recorded history. Panic spread as the first shots were exchanged. On Earth, Chen received the news in a hastily convened emergency meeting. The projections were grim. The Velkari had defenses, but lacked experience in deploying them tactically. The Crovar had millennia of experience in war. Without intervention, the Velkari would be defeated in a matter of days. "We must intervene," Volkov declared immediately. "The Velkari are our partners. To let them fall would betray everything we've built." "But intervening militarily is exactly what the opponents of the cooperation network want," Stein countered. "They'll say we're just another empire, imposing our will through superior force." Chen was silent, thinking. The dilemma was real. Military intervention would save the Velkari, but potentially destroy the credibility of the cooperation network. Not intervening would preserve ideological purity, but allow the massacre of partners. Was there a third path? "Open a channel," she said finally. "Not just to the Crovar, but to all civilizations in the galaxy. Open transmission." "Veil." When the connection was established, Chen spoke directly to Supreme General Crovar Thakkor, whose predatory face filled the main screen. "General Thakkor, this is Secretary General Sarah Chen of Earth. I have come to make you an offer." The Crovar laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "An offer? I'm in the process of conquering a world rich in resources and advanced technology. What offer could you possibly make that would interest me?" "A demonstration," Chen replied calmly. "You know Earth possesses significantly advanced technology. You know we could intervene militarily on behalf of the Velkari, but we choose not to do so, because force, General, is not the only form of power." "So you will let your Velkari friends die?" Thakkor mocked. "What weak allies you are." "I didn't say we wouldn't intervene," Chen corrected. "I said we wouldn't intervene militarily. There's a difference." She gestured, and the image shifted to show space around the Velkari worlds. But it didn't just show the Crovar fleets. It showed something else, something materializing around them. Massive-scale energy fields, not to attack, but to contain. "What is this?" Thakkor demanded, alarm finally piercing his voice. "It's called the Embrace of Containment," Chen explained, "a technology developed through collaboration between Earth, Thracians, Velkari, and X-Then. It creates multidimensional phase fields that don't harm anything inside them, but completely prevent movement or communication outside. Your fleets, General, are now in 127 separate containment bubbles. They cannot maneuver. They cannot fire weapons. They cannot even send messages to each other. They are completely isolated, but perfectly safe." Thakkor roared in anger. "This is an act of war." Chen shook her head. "No, General. This is an act of pacification. We didn't destroy your ships. We didn't kill your crews. We simply removed your ability to cause harm. And now I will make my offer again. This time, I suggest you listen carefully. The Crovar fleets have supplies for approximately 30 standard days inside the containment. More than enough. During that time, you are invited, along with your senior officers, to come to Earth. Not as prisoners, but as guests. We will show you exactly what the Cooperation Network has achieved. We will give you full access to our research data, our scientific facilities, our political discussions. You will see, unfiltered, how cooperation works. And then, after 30 days, we will release you, along with your fleets. No conditions, no demands, and we will let you choose. Continue the path of conquest or consider that there may be a better way. Silence stretched. Finally, Thakur spoke, his voice stripped of some of its earlier bravado. And if I refuse your offer, if I demand the release of my fleets immediately, then we will release them, Chen said simply. And you may resume your attack on the Velkari. But know this, we will do it again and again. Every time you try to use force against members of the Cooperation Network, we will respond with containment, not with destruction. We will simply remove your ability to cause harm until you recognize there are alternatives. It took 3 days of Krovar deliberations before Thakur accepted the offer. When he finally came to Earth, it was with 20 of his senior officers, all visibly tense, clearly expecting a trap or trick. Instead, Chen fulfilled her promise exactly. The Krovar were given full access, supervised but not restricted. They saw laboratories where scientists of 6 different species worked side by side on problems none could solve alone. They observed global council debates where genuine disagreements were resolved through argument and compromise, not imposition. They witnessed industrial facilities where advanced technology was produced not for the accumulation of power, but for distribution based on need. And slowly, visibly, their attitudes began to change. The turning point came in the 3rd week, when Thakur asked to visit one of the facilities Earth had kept most secret. Project Evolution, the successor to Project Awakening. Where Awakening had been about military capability, Evolution was about social transformation. Chen hesitated. Showing this to a general of a warrior civilization seemed an enormous risk. But the entire premise of the Cooperation Network was intentional vulnerability, trust built through openness. So she agreed. The facility was located on Mars, buried beneath the surface, but unlike the military installations, this one was organic, almost alive in appearance. Inside, Thakur saw something that shocked him to his core. Humans being biologically modified. Not for war, but for adaptation, to survive in alien environments without terraforming, to communicate directly with species that use different sensory modalities, to literally become living bridges between civilizations. You're altering your own species? Thakur asked, genuinely stunned. Not forcing, Chen corrected, offering. Every person here voluntarily chose to undergo modification. Some want to explore worlds that would be fatal to baseline humans. Others want to deepen connections with partner species. All of them understand they are becoming something new, something beyond what humanity has ever been. But why? Thakur pressed. Why alter yourselves? Why not force others to adapt to you? Chen looked at him directly. Because we learned, through painful history, that imposing change on others breeds resentment and rebellion. But choosing change personally, that creates possibility. These individuals are literally transforming themselves into the bridges that will connect our civilization to others. Not through force or coercion, but through voluntary transformation that makes deep understanding possible. Thakur was silent for a long time, watching the human volunteers in various stages of transformation. Finally, he spoke, and his voice carried something Chen never expected to hear from a Krovar general. Admiration. You're insane, he said, completely incomprehensibly insane. No rational species would willingly alter its own form. No sane civilization would open its deepest vulnerabilities to potential adversaries. Everything you do violates every principle of self-preservation we know. He paused, then continued, and yet it works. Against all logic, against all historical experience, it works. I've seen it with my own eyes, and now I no longer know what to believe. Believe, Chen said softly, that cooperation is not weakness. Believe that intentional vulnerability can be stronger than armor. Believe that there are paths beyond conquest and submission. Not because I say so, but because you've seen it. When the 30 days ended, Thak-Kor returned to his fleets, which were released from the containment bubbles, exactly as promised. And then, in a transmission that shocked the entire Krovar galaxy, he announced that he was stepping down from command and recommending that the Krovar Empire begin negotiations for possible membership in the cooperation network. The decision was controversial. Krovar militarist factions denounced Thak-Kor as a traitor, as weak, as corrupted. But others, particularly the civilian population that had long suffered under constant war policies, embraced the possibility of an alternative. The Krovar Empire split into civil war, conservative factions against reformists, and it was then that the true strength of the cooperation network was tested. Chen received urgent requests for help from reformist Krovar being crushed by superior conservative forces. It was a situation analogous to the Velkari, but more complex. The reformist Krovar were not innocent victims. They were a faction of a warrior society, themselves having participated in past conquests. Helping them meant taking sides in a civil war, something that set a dangerous precedent. The debate in the Global Council was intense. Some argued that the cooperation network should not intervene in the internal affairs of other species. Others insisted that letting reformists die would betray the principles of the network. Chen listened to all sides, then made a decision that would be controversial, but she believed correct. "We will intervene," she announced, "but not militarily. We will offer refuge. Any Krovar, reformist or conservative, who wants to leave the war zone may come to Worlds of the Cooperation Network. We will provide transport, shelter, resources. We will not take sides. We will simply offer a third option: exit." The policy was implemented immediately. Ships from Earth, Thracian, Velkari, and Exthen entered Krovar space not as an invading force, but as evacuation convoys. And something remarkable happened. Krovar from both sides, weary of war, began accepting the offer. Reformists, certainly, but also conservatives, ordinary soldiers who simply wanted to live without constant conflict. Civilians who had never had a choice about the paths their leaders took. Within 6 months, nearly 30% of the Krovar population had emigrated to Worlds of the network. Those who remained continued fighting, but with a drastically reduced population, the war dwindled. Eventually, exhausted, and realizing they were fighting over an empire that no longer existed in any meaningful form, the remaining factions negotiated a ceasefire. And then, something no one predicted. Representatives from both sides, separately, applied for membership in the cooperation network. Not as a unified Krovar empire, but as separate entities, each recognizing the old order was over. Chen accepted them, both with conditions. The Krovar, regardless of faction, would have to participate in reconciliation processes. They would have to contribute reparations to species they had previously conquered. And they would have to genuinely embrace the principles of cooperation, not just pay lip service. It was a difficult, painful process that would take generations. But it had begun. Meanwhile, the cooperation network continued to grow, not through aggressive expansion, but through attraction. Species seeing the tangible benefits, advanced technology, peaceful conflict resolution, improved quality of life, began to apply. The accession process was rigorous. Candidate civilizations had to demonstrate genuine commitment to the network's principles. They had to share their own technologies and knowledge, and they had to accept oversight, not control, but genuine verification that they were abiding by the agreed terms. 5 years after the initial revelation of Project Awakening, more than 200 civilizations had joined the network. Another 400 were associate partners, participating in specific programs, but not fully integrated. And the 8 ancient civilizations continued their role as mentors and guardians, offering guidance but never dictating. It was at this point that Chen received an unexpected visitor. The core Silent appeared in her office at the Geneva complex without warning, simply materializing as if it had always been there. "Sarah Chen," it said, its telepathic voice carrying unusual urgency. "We must speak. Immediately." Chen dismissed her scheduled meetings and followed the Silent into a private chamber. Once isolated, the Silent spoke. "You have succeeded beyond our most optimistic expectations. The cooperation network is thriving. The new paradigm is taking hold. But now you face a final test, one that will determine whether everything you've built can survive." Chen felt tension in her stomach. "What test?" "There is a civilization," the Silent said, "that we have kept secret, a civilization we call the Devourer. It does not exist in normal space, but in parallel dimensions, feeding on energy produced by conflicts between intelligent species. For 800,000 years, we have maintained barriers, preventing it from fully entering our dimension. But," the Silent continued, "the Devourer is waking. The dramatic reduction in galactic conflict since the formation of the cooperation network is starving it, and a starving entity is a desperate one. It is beginning to force the barriers. In approximately 2 standard years, it will break through. And when it does, it will attempt to initiate conflict on an unprecedented scale in order to feed." Chen felt the weight of those words. "So everything we've built, all the peace we've achieved, it's going to attract something that wants to destroy us?" "Ironically, yes," the Silent confirmed, "but there is another side. A united civilization, genuinely cooperating, is far more capable of defending itself than fractured civilizations fighting among themselves. The Devourer has always attacked when galaxies were divided. It has never faced coordinated resistance. You have a chance, small perhaps but real, to do what no civilization has ever done before: defeat the Devourer permanently." Chen processed this. How? What weapons work against something from another dimension? "Weapons will not win this," the Silent replied. "The Devourer is an entity of pure energy. It feeds on negative emotions, fear, anger, hatred generated by conflict. Attacking it only strengthens it. The only way to defeat it is to starve it, to maintain cooperation, peace, solidarity, even under attack. It is a test of collective resolve, unlike anything ever seen." Chen nodded slowly, understanding dawning. "So it's not a military battle. It's a psychological one, against our own tendencies to fall into panic, into division, into conflict under pressure." "Precisely," the Silent agreed. "And based on everything we have learned about intelligent species behavior over 800,000 years, your chances of maintaining unity under attack from the Devourer are approximately 3%. That is why ancient civilizations never attempted to defeat it permanently. We simply kept it contained and allowed it to feed on the inevitable conflicts of younger species." Chen felt anger rise. "So you allowed wars, allowed suffering, just to keep this thing fed and dormant?" "We acknowledge," the Silent said, and there was genuine sorrow in its voice, "that it is a morally repugnant choice. It is also the reason so many ancient civilizations eventually chose total isolation. The burden of maintaining balance through passive allowance of suffering is almost unbearable. But the alternative, allowing the Devourer to awaken fully, always seemed worse. Until now." Chen understood. Until now, because for the first time there is a real chance to defeat it. A small chance, but real. Exactly, the Silent confirmed. If the cooperation network can maintain cohesion under the Devourer's attack, if it can resist its influence, which amplifies every negative emotion, every fear, every suspicion, then it can force it into permanent starvation. And an entity that can no longer feed eventually dissipates. 2 years, Chen said. We have 2 years to prepare 200 civilizations for a psychological test that 1,221 species failed on smaller scales. The Silent nodded. It is insufficient time, but it is all the time there is. The ancient civilizations will provide all assistance possible. But the core of the resistance must come from the younger species, from you, because you are the ones who genuinely believe cooperation can prevail. We ancients are too cynical. We've seen too much failure. We need your faith. Chen took a deep breath. Then it's time to find out if everything we've built is strong enough. Time to prove that humanity and its partners can be more than the 1,221 species that failed before. She looked directly to where she imagined the Silent's eyes might be behind its garments. Tell the other ancients we are committed. We will resist the Devourer, and not only resist, we will win, because we have no alternative. Because everything we've built, all the peace we've achieved, every life we've saved, depends on it. The next 2 years were the most intense in the history of the Cooperation Network. Chen personally traveled to hundreds of worlds, explaining the threat, preparing populations, strengthening bonds between civilizations. Psychologists from dozens of species worked together to develop protocols to maintain mental cohesion under psychic attack. Engineers built defense systems not for physical attacks, but for dimensional intrusions. And philosophers, artists, and spiritual leaders from every culture collaborated to create narratives of unity, shared symbols, collective mantras that could anchor civilizations when everything else faltered. The day finally came. Sensors across the galaxy detected it simultaneously. The dimensional barriers were failing. The Devourer was coming. It did not arrive as a fleet or an army. It arrived as a presence, a psychic pressure that descended on every intelligent mind in the galaxy at once. Chen felt it, a whisper at the back of her consciousness, amplifying every doubt, every fear, every resentment, saying that cooperation was weak, that allies were traitors waiting for an opportunity, that only force guaranteed survival. She felt it, recognized it for what it was, and resisted. Across the galaxy, billions did the same. Some failed. Civilizations with histories of deep trauma, with unhealed wounds, began to fracture. Accusations flew. Alliances strained. But for every civilization that wavered, 10 stood firm. They remembered why they had chosen cooperation. They remembered the tangible benefits they had received. And more importantly, they remembered that they were not alone. When militarist factions on a Thracian world attempted a coup, claiming the network had weakened them, it was the Velkari and humans who intervened with medical aid and food, demonstrating that cooperation meant real mutual support. When Krovar colonists began to fight over resources, it was the X-Then who offered their mining technology, showing that abundance came through sharing, not hoarding. And slowly, week by week, month by month, the Devourer's influence weakened. It was starving. Each attempt to sow conflict was countered by civilizations choosing cooperation. Each whisper of fear was silenced by acts of solidarity. It wasn't perfect. There were failures. There were localized conflicts. But the overall scale of cooperation held. After 18 months of constant pressure, the Devourer attempted a final attack. It partially manifested in normal space, a chaotic energy entity that caused panic in star systems. Fleets were mobilized, weapons charged. It was exactly what the Devourer wanted, a massive military response that would generate enough fear and anger to feed it, but that is not what it received. Instead, Chen issued an order that ran counter to every military instinct. Do not engage, observe, but do not attack. And across the galaxy, commanders of 200 different civilizations did the hardest thing possible. They obeyed. Fleets held position, but did not fire. The Devourer roared, its manifestations straining to provoke a response. But when none came, when civilizations simply refused to feed it with the conflict it craved, it began to fade. It took 3 additional months of disciplined non-response before it finally dissipated completely, its essence fragmenting back into the dimensions from which it came. When sensors confirmed it was gone, that the dimensional barriers had been restored, a wave of celebration swept the galaxy. Not a celebration of military victory, but of collective resilience. They had faced an existential threat, not with weapons, but with the determination to uphold their values under unimaginable pressure. And they had prevailed. Chen was in her office when the core silent appeared for the last time. "You did it," it said, and its telepathic voice carried something Chen had never heard before. Awe. In 800,000 years, we have never witnessed this. We never imagined it was possible. You humans, with your partner species, achieved what we thought impossible. It wasn't just us, Chen replied. It was everyone, every civilization that chose to believe that cooperation was more than an empty word. Everyone who endured the test. The silent nodded. True. But it was humanity that initiated the cascade. It was your ultimatum, your choice to reveal power not for conquest, but for protection, that set everything else in motion. And now, it paused. Now the 8 ancient civilizations have a decision to make. For 800,000 years, we have kept our role as silent observers and guardians. But you have proven there is another path, so we have decided to emerge fully. No more hiding, no more secrecy. We will become full members of the galactic community. Chen felt the weight of that declaration. The implications were enormous. 8 civilizations with hundreds of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge becoming active participants instead of passive observers. It would change everything again. But this time, the change would come from a place of hope instead of fear. Then welcome, she said simply. Welcome to the Cooperation Network, though I suspect we'll soon need a new name. This is no longer just a network. It's the beginning of something much larger. The silent made a gesture Chen had learned to recognize as its equivalent of a smile. We already have a name for it. The ancient civilizations have convened and decided. We will call it the Consortium, not a federation with hierarchies, not an empire with center and periphery, but a true consortium where every member, young or old, small or large, has an equal voice and contributes according to its unique capabilities. In the years that followed, the consortium flourished in ways no one could have predicted. Technology advanced in leaps that would have taken millions of years under the old paradigm. Civilizations that had spent centuries fighting each other now collaborated on projects that benefited the entire galaxy. Dying stars were rejuvenated, granting billions of additional years of life to the systems around them. Barren worlds were transformed into habitable paradises, not through brute force terraforming, but through careful adaptation that respected existing ecologies. Diseases that had plagued species for millennia were cured through shared medical knowledge. And perhaps most importantly, barriers between civilizations began to dissolve. Not through homogenization, each culture kept its unique identity, but through genuine understanding. Earth's Project Evolution was adopted by dozens of species, volunteers choosing to modify themselves to serve as living bridges between civilizations. Chen, now well into her 70s but rejuvenated by advanced medical technologies that would easily grant her another century or more of active life, found herself reflecting on the journey as she stood on an observation platform at one of the consortium's transit stations. The station orbited a neutral star, chosen specifically because it belonged to no civilization. It was truly shared territory, a meeting point for the entire galaxy. Through the massive windows, she could see ships of hundreds of different designs arriving and departing. Thracian freighters alongside Velkari explorers, reformed Krovar transports working in coordination with Exthen frigates, and mixed among them, ships of the ancient civilizations, no longer hidden but proudly visible, their impossible forms reminders of how vast the universe was and how much there still was to learn. "Impressive, isn't it?" a familiar voice said behind her. Chen turned to see Vexithara, the former Thracian Supreme Commander, now the consortium's cultural ambassador. The Thracian leader had aged as well, her carapace showing the color patterns her species developed in advanced age. But her eyes still held the sharp intelligence that Chen remembered from their tense, early encounters. "It is," Chen agreed. "Sometimes I still can't believe we got here. That all this began only 15 years ago with a desperate ultimatum." "It wasn't just the ultimatum," Vexithara said, moving to stand beside her, both watching the traffic. "It was what came after, the willingness to show vulnerability, the persistence in cooperation even when it would have been easier to resort to force, the faith that there was a better path." She paused. "You humans taught me something I thought impossible to learn at my age, that being wrong can be a gift, not a shame." Chen smiled. "We were all wrong, Ambassador, myself included. I thought revealed power would be enough. I didn't realize that shared power would be transformative." The conversation was interrupted by an announcement throughout the station. A ceremony was about to begin in the central amphitheater. Chen and Vexithara joined the flow of beings moving in that direction. The amphitheater was an impressive structure, capable of accommodating 10,000 individuals of varied physiologies simultaneously. Today, it was filled to capacity. The ceremony was historic, the formal opening of the first interspecies academy, where youths from every civilization in the consortium would study together, learn from each other, and form bonds that would last entire lifetimes. Chen had been invited to give the opening address. As she stepped onto the stage and looked out at the sea of faces, faces that were human, Thracian, Velkari, Exthen, Krovar, and dozens of other species, including representatives of the 8 ancient civilizations, she felt emotion tighten her throat. "Welcome," she began, her voice amplified and simultaneously translated into hundreds of languages. "Welcome to the first class of the Consortium Academy. You are pioneers, explorers not of physical space, but of an even more important territory. The space between civilizations, between different ways of thinking, between forms of life that evolved under stars separated by light years." She paused, letting the translations catch up. 15 years ago, humanity made a choice. We revealed power we had kept hidden, not for conquest, but for protection. We issued an ultimatum to the galaxy. Stop oppressing the weak or face consequences. It was a moment of pride for my species. It was also a moment of fear, because we did not know what would happen next. We did not know whether our revelation would lead to peace or to even greater war. Chen walked slowly across the stage, making eye contact with several sections of the audience. As it turned out, it led to both and neither. It led to challenges we never imagined. It led to impossible choices. It led to the ultimate test of whether cooperation could truly prevail over competition. And you, all of you, your civilizations, your ancestors, passed that test. Not perfectly. There were stumbles, there were failures. But the overall trajectory, the arc of galactic history over the past 15 years, has been toward greater understanding, greater cooperation, greater unity in diversity. And now, she gestured to the students, you inherit that legacy. but you also inherit responsibility. Because the work is not complete, it will never be complete. Each generation must choose cooperation over conflict anew, must build bridges where previous generations built walls, must imagine possibilities their ancestors could not. You will study together here, learn sciences, arts, philosophies from civilizations across the galaxy. But the most important lesson, I hope, is one that cannot be formally taught. It can only be lived. The lesson that difference is not a threat, it is wealth. That the strangeness of another is not something to be feared or subdued, but celebrated and learned from. That the universe is vast enough for countless ways of being, and all of us are richer for that diversity. Chen stopped at the center of the stage. So go, she said, learn, grow, make friendships that cross every boundary that once divided your ancestors. And when you graduate, when you return to your worlds, carry with you not just knowledge, but understanding, not just skills, but empathy. Be the bridges that connect the future to the present we have built together. The amphitheater erupted in applause, whistles, trumpets, and sounds of approval from dozens of different species. Chen left the stage, feeling the weight of years, but also a deep satisfaction. She had done her part. Now, it was the next generation's turn. In the years that followed, Chen gradually withdrew from public duties. She remained as a consultant, her experience and wisdom still valuable, but the daily work of managing the consortium passed into younger hands. She spent her time traveling, visiting worlds she had never seen, getting to know cultures in a depth her official obligations had never allowed. It was on one of these trips to a Valkyrie waterworld that she finally met Shell singing in rain again. The Valkyrie matriarch was now even older, her body showing the signs of advanced age in her species, but her mind remained sharp. The two old friends spent days in Shell Singing's aquatic garden, discussing philosophy, recalling past challenges, dreaming of future possibilities. "You know what I most admire about humans?" Shell Singing asked one of those days. Chen smiled. "Tell me." "Your capacity to dream beyond your limitations. Most species, when they reach a certain level of development, become conservative. They protect what they've achieved, they resist changes that might threaten stability. But humans," she made the water patterns that equaled laughter, "humans always want more. Not more in the sense of conquest or accumulation, but more understanding, more connection, more possibility. They are never satisfied with what is. They always imagine what could be." Chen considered that. "I suppose it's true, but it has a price. That restlessness, that constant drive beyond, sometimes makes it hard to appreciate the present." Shell Singing rippled in agreement. "All strengths have shadows. The trick is to embrace the strength while recognizing the shadow. Not eliminate it, for that would eliminate the strength too, but balance it, temper it with wisdom." "That is why the consortium works," Chen said thoughtfully, "because it brings together species with different strengths and shadows. Humans bring restless ambition, Valkyrie bring philosophical patience, Thracians bring organizational wisdom, X-then bring technical adaptability, and so on. Alone, each of us is unbalanced. Together we create something more complete." "Precisely," Shell Singing agreed. "It is sympathy in the truest sense, not just compassion, but the harmony of different parts creating a whole that transcends any individual part." Chen spent her final years teaching, writing, and mentoring young leaders of the consortium. She saw the Interspecies Academy graduate 5 classes, each more diverse and integrated than the last. She saw technologies that would have seemed magical 15 years earlier become routine. She saw conflicts that once would have led to war resolved through mediation and compromise. And she saw, with deep satisfaction, humanity take its place not as rulers of the galaxy, but as valuable members of a truly interspecies community. It was on her 100th birthday, celebrated modestly in a small gathering of close friends and family, that Chen received an unexpected message. The core silence, along with the other 7 ancient civilizations, were inviting her to a special ceremony. The ceremony took place in the same trinary star system where Chen had first encountered the silence decades earlier. But the station had changed, expanded, transformed into something even more awe-inspiring. When Chen arrived, she was greeted not only by a silent, but by representatives of all 8 ancient civilizations. "Sarah Chen of Earth," the silent said, "the 8 civilizations wish to honor you. Not with title or position, you have made clear you do not desire such things, but with recognition and revelation." Another figure, a representative of the Void Weavers, spoke with a voice that sounded like music of the spheres. "In our collective records, spanning millions of years, we have catalogued 2,147 species that reached interstellar travel. Of these, we track the role of specific individuals in 1,147 cases where personal choices dramatically altered civilizational trajectories." A third elder from the Andromeda Guardians continued, "Of all those individuals, across all recorded history, only 47 made decisions that not only changed their own civilizations, but altered the fundamental paradigm of how multiple civilizations interact. You, Sarah Chen, are the 48th. Your decision to reveal Project Awakening not for conquest but for protection, your subsequent choice to share power rather than hoard it, your persistence in cooperation when force would have been easier. These actions triggered a cascade that transformed the galaxy." Chen felt embarrassed by the attention. "I didn't do it alone," she protested. "Millions contributed." "True," the silent agreed, "but leadership matters, vision matters, and you provided both at critical moments. So with your permission, we would like to do something unprecedented." A fourth elder from a civilization Chen did not recognize gestured. "At the center of the station is a chamber we call the Archive of Possibilities. It contains records not only of what happened, but of what could have happened, branching points where individual choices altered historical courses. We would like to add your record there, not as a memorial. You are still alive and presumably will live for decades more, but as a living example of how one person, at the right moment making the right choice, can change everything." Chen was silent for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "It would be an honor," she said simply, "but with one condition." The silent leaned forward. "What condition?" "That the record makes clear it was not just my choice. It was humanity's collective choice, built on the work of generations before me. It was the Velkari's choice to trust when trust seemed madness. It was Vexthara's choice to adapt when adaptation meant admitting error. It was the choice of countless individuals across hundreds of worlds to choose cooperation when competition would have been easier. I am only the visible face of a transformation that involved billions." The elders exchanged glances, communicating in ways Chen could not perceive. Then the silent spoke. "We agree. The record will reflect the collective nature of the transformation, but it will also honor your specific role, because humility, though admirable, must not obscure historical responsibility. You made choices. They mattered. That deserves recognition." The ceremony that followed was simple but profound. Chen was taken to the Archive of Possibilities, a vast chamber where lines of probability were made visible, showing how history could have unfolded differently at thousands of decision points. Her own decision point was highlighted, the moment 15 years earlier when she authorized the activation of Project Awakening. From there, 2 main lines diverged. One showed the galaxy as it would have been had she chosen defensive isolation instead of cooperative engagement. It showed Earth surrounded by impenetrable defenses, but essentially alone, while the rest of the galaxy fell into an arms race that eventually led to devastating conflict. The other line, the one that had been followed, showed the development of the consortium and the flourishing cooperation that had transformed the galaxy. The difference was staggering. Chen looked at the two possibilities, clearly seeing how narrow the line had been between success and disaster. One different choice, one moment of weakness or fear, and everything would have been different. "You see now," the silence said softly, "why we honor you. Not because it was inevitable, but because it was not. You chose well when the wrong choice was equally available." Chen nodded, feeling the weight of the responsibility she had carried without fully realizing it. "Then I feel even more obligation," she said, "to ensure the next generation understands, that they never grow complacent, that they remember each generation faces its own choices, its own branching points, and that the future is never guaranteed. It always depends on the choices we make moment by moment." When Chen returned to Earth for the last time, it was as a teacher more than a leader. She spent her final years at the Interspecies Academy, not giving formal lectures, but simply being available. Students from dozens of species sought her out, asking questions, seeking advice, trying to understand how decisions were made in critical moments. And Chen answered honestly, without false heroism or excessive modesty. She simply shared her experience, her doubts, her fears, and her hopes. Sarah Chen passed away peacefully at the age of 127, surrounded by friends and family from half a dozen different species. Her funeral was a galactic affair, not because she would have wanted it, but because what she represented had become a symbol for billions. Representatives of every member civilization of the consortium attended, along with the 8 elders. The eulogy was given by a young human woman, one of the first graduates of the Interspecies Academy, who had undergone voluntary modifications that allowed her to survive in aquatic environments. She was literally a living bridge between humanity and aquatic species, a physical embodiment of Chen's vision. "Sarah Chen taught us," the young woman said, "that power is not measured by how hard you can strike, but by how firmly you can hold your hand when every fiber of your being wants to pull the trigger. She taught us that true strength is intentional vulnerability, that true leadership is service without expectation of glory, and she taught us more than anything that the future is not destiny, it is choice. A choice each of us makes in every moment, between fear and hope, between isolation and connection, between power that dominates and power that uplifts." Chen's body was cremated and her ashes scattered into space as she had requested, with no specific location. Wherever they travel, she had written in her final instructions, "Perhaps they'll find worlds with life. And if they do, perhaps something of me will help fertilize a new beginning." It was a characteristic thought, focused not on personal memorial, but on future possibility. Years passed. Decades. The consortium kept growing, facing new challenges, adapting, evolving. The Interspecies Academy became a central institution, educating generations of leaders who saw interspecies cooperation not as a distant ideal, but as a lived reality. Conflict still occurred, of course. The nature of intelligent life included disagreement, competition, occasional breaks in understanding. But a framework now existed to resolve such conflicts without violence, and it was used repeatedly and successfully. 50 years after Chen's death, Project Evolution, which she had championed, bore unexpected fruit. Generations of volunteers from dozens of species, modifying themselves to serve as bridges, had created an entire population of beings who did not clearly belong to any one species, but embodied elements of many. These chosen hybrids, as they came to be called, became invaluable facilitators of dialogue and understanding between civilizations. Their very existence challenged old notions of species boundaries. And on her 100th birthday, Shells Singing in Rain, now extremely old even by long Velkari standards, made an announcement that shocked the consortium. The Velkari, she declared, offered to cede one of their sacred worlds to become a permanent home for the chosen hybrids. Not as a reservation or segregation, but as a base. A place where those who had sacrificed the unique identities of their species of origin could build a new culture, uniquely their own. It would be a world where boundaries between species did not exist, where ways of being that transcended evolutionary origin were the norm rather than the exception. The offer was accepted, and the world, renamed Nexus, became one of the jewels of the consortium. A place of pilgrimage for those seeking to understand what it truly meant to transcend differences, a living laboratory of post-species possibilities. And through it all, Sarah Chen's legacy endured. Not in monuments or statues, though there were some, but in the choices subsequent generations made. Every time a civilization chose cooperation over competition, it honored her memory. Every time a leader chose vulnerability over brute force, they followed her example. Every time an individual of any species looked at a being unlike themselves and saw not a threat but a possibility, they were living her vision. 100 years after her death, when the last person who had known her personally passed away, there was fear that her legacy might begin to fade, becoming mere history instead of lived reality. But something remarkable happened. A new generation, who knew Chen only through records, chose to renew the commitment to the principles she represented. They did this not out of obligatory reverence, but because they had personally seen that cooperation worked. They had lived in a galaxy where peace was the norm rather than the exception, where knowledge flowed freely, where the identity of each species was celebrated rather than threatened. And they were unwilling to give that up. So the consortium endured, grew, evolved. And somewhere, in the vastness of space where Sarah Chen's ashes had been scattered, molecules that had once composed her body found their way into dust clouds that would eventually coalesce into new stars, new worlds. And perhaps, on some of those worlds, life would eventually emerge. And perhaps that life would look to the stars and wonder what place it held in the cosmos. And if it were lucky, very lucky, it would encounter the civilizations of the consortium, and it would learn the lesson that humanity, through Sarah Chen and countless others, had taught the galaxy. That true power does not come from how hard you can strike. It comes from how firmly you can extend your hand, and that the future belongs not to those who conquer, but to those who cooperate. This was the story of how humanity gave the galaxy an ultimatum, how it revealed power it had hidden for centuries, and how, against all odds, it transformed a show of strength into the foundation for peace that would last millennia. It was not a perfect story. It had flaws, stumbles, moments of doubt and near disasters. But it was a true story, and its truth, its visceral authenticity, was what made it powerful. Because in the end, what humanity proved was not that they were stronger than everyone else. It was that choice matters. That even when it seems there are only bad paths available, there is always the possibility of creating a new path. And that sometimes, just sometimes, choosing cooperation over competition, vulnerability over armor, trust over suspicion, is not naivete. It is deeper wisdom. This was the lesson. This was the legacy. This was the gift that humanity, through Sarah Chen and all who followed her example, gave to the galaxy. And it was a gift that would keep on giving, generation after generation, as long as stars shone and intelligent beings looked to the cosmos wondering what their place in it was. The answer, as Chen had taught, was simple but profound. Your place is what you choose to make of it. Not through strength that subjugates, but through strength that uplifts. not through power that divides, but through power that unites. This was humanity's supreme ultimatum, and the galaxy eventually and wisely accepted.